And in terms of your question on immigrants, I think a person is a person, regardless of what their legal status is, and their legal status can change. And I don't know or really care what their legal status is personally. I think if they're a person, they're my neighbor, and I'm going to treat them that way.
I think that there's a difference between being kind, and to me, my faith is one thing is being nice to people from different lands, but they also have to be respectful of our laws. And everybody wants to come to the United States because we have a great economy, have a lot of opportunity, but there's a process to do that. My family has been here since at least the 1700s. There's no one that gave us a free $1,400 debit card. No one gave us a free apartment. No one gave us anything free. We had to work for it. So there is a process. And if we respect all people, that means that the people that come here need to respect our laws. And that's all that we're saying. We allowed 20 million immigrants in here legally since 2000. How much is too much, and how much are we going to put the burden on the taxpayers? Because the money has to come from somewhere. It's just common sense.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Political Common Sense. I'm absolutely fired up today because we've got a major moment to break down. We're going to be unpacking a recent panel discussion on the Faulkner Focus, airing on Fox News Channel, and what you're about to see is more than just talking points, it's a showdown of facts versus feelings. Everyone is entitled to their emotions, how you feel about the economy, how you feel about immigration, how you feel about government, fine. But everyone is not entitled to their own facts. In this episode, we'll watch key clips from the Fox show, dissect what was said, compare it with what the data shows, expose claims that don't hold up, and highlight the truths that matter for our country right now. We'll cover three big themes: the economy and inflation, immigration and border policy, and the budget/government shutdown fights. These are issues that affect every American household, regardless of party. So buckle up. We're cutting through the spin, we're calling out the claims, and we're landing on the truths. Let's get started, and let's dive right in. All right, everyone, let's begin with inflation. This is one of the most talked about issues on the minds of voters today. What you're going to hear from the panel are concerns about prices, taxes, housing, and interest rates, all of which matter deeply to the budgets of ordinary Americans. But before we launch into commentary, let me emphasize this. You are absolutely entitled to how you feel about these economic pressures. But you are not entitled to your own version of the facts. The facts are what they are, and today we're going to compare what was said on that show with what the data actually reveals. We'll listen to the voices from the panel, then we'll unpack the claims, identify what's accurate, what's exaggerated, and what it means for real people. So without further delay, let's listen in on what a member of the panel had to say.
So for the midterms, give me what's most important to you.
The economy. I just feel like we haven't had any reprieve from the inflation. We don't have like the taxes are just out of control. I really feel that, Americans need breathing room, and we don't have that right now. Interest rates are really high. Housing is unaffordable. It's really, really difficult for, anybody to make it. That's how I feel. I mean, if I feel these pressures as a business person, I can only imagine what the middle class and lower middle class feel like. Obviously, there are people there making money. There are people in the upper echelons that succeed and do well. But I believe for the middle class, it's really, really, really difficult. And I mean, if I'm feeling it, I can only imagine others are too.
It's interesting. And you've been on panels in the past here on Voters' Voices. I welcome you back. As an independent, you can see it kind of different ways, but you're hitting on that affordability situation. And that's something that Republicans are going to have to deal with. They're seeing it in a lot of different places. But the facts are that inflation has come down precipitously. And the problem is that it was at 9% or better for so long under the last president that the prices don't come down. They wait for the economy to reset. And so the 2 to 3% that we continue to go up is based on those high prices. And that's what affects affordability. So you've got to hit at something that takes away the pricing, like the price of energy, like some of the things that Republicans and this Republican president have said that he's trying to do through the tariffs. So we're watching all of it. But what you feel counts. Dwayne, I want to come.
What we just heard from the panelist reflects what many Americans are feeling: higher costs for everyday goods and services, a housing market that is difficult to afford, and rising interest rates. These are not just stories. They align with measurable economic trends. But the challenge is this. We must separate the headline emotion, everything is out of control, from the detailed data, how far, in which areas, and what has shifted. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers, CPIU, rose by 2.3% over the 12 months ending April 2025. More recent data show that by September 2025, the annual rate climbed to about 3.0%. So let's clarify. The panelists' sense that we haven't had any reprieve is grounded in truth. Many price levels are still well above what they were before the pandemic. But the implicit claim that inflation is still moving at the 9%, 10% pace seen at its peak is incorrect. In fact, the rate has cooled markedly from that 2022 high. The host's commentary echoed this. Inflation has come down. The problem is that it was at 9% or better for so long, the prices don't come down. On the surface, that is correct. Price levels don't simply fall because the inflation rate falls. However, suggesting the situation remains as severe as at the height of inflation is misleading. Here are the core fact checks. It is true that inflation once reached unusually high levels, and everyday cost burdens remain strong. It is true that the inflation rate has declined significantly, meaning the pace of price increases has slowed. But to say we haven't had any reprieve without acknowledging the slowdown misleads, as relief in the inflation rate has occurred. Also missing in the panel comments is nuance. Certain categories like shelter, used cars, and some services remain stubbornly high, while others, like gasoline and some goods, have fallen or stabilized. For example, the BLS data show that all items less food and energy rose about 3.0% over the year to September. What are the takeaway points for policy and for households? For American families who recall cost levels from before 2021, the elevated housing, energy, and interest rate pressures are real and intense. The fact that inflation is lower now doesn't instantly erase that burden, but it does open a window for relief and recovery. Smart policy must focus not just on headline inflation rates, but also the underlying drivers: housing supply, energy costs, regulatory burden, labor costs, and federal budgeting. Unless those root causes are addressed, today's slower inflation could turn into tomorrow's renewed surge. In summary, the narrative must have nuance. The truth lies somewhere between prices are still high and inflation is currently out of control at peak levels. By treating the facts carefully, instead of exaggerating or understating, we set a better foundation for public understanding. Now that we've reviewed the numbers and the claims, we're ready to move to the next topic. Okay, everyone. Next, we're moving into immigration and how we manage who comes into this country, under what rules, and what it means for all of us. This topic is one of the most emotionally charged in American politics, yet behind the emotion lie real data, actual processes, laws, and measurable consequences. We're about to hear a panel discussion where the issue of fairness, legality, and neighborliness collided. You'll hear someone argue we can be welcoming, yet we must insist on respect for our laws. Then we'll unpack what was said, what aligns with the facts, what doesn't, and what the numbers actually show us. Let's remember, kindness is vital, compassion matters, but so does sovereignty, the rule of law and fairness, to both newcomers and those who followed our system. Getting either of those out of balance creates unfairness and dysfunction. So here's what we'll do next. We'll play the clip from the show, then dive into the claims, compare them against the data, expose what's misleading or exaggerated, and highlight the real policy implications. Let's play the clip now and listen closely to what a panel member had to say.
Talk to me about what you're hearing from an independent and a Republican now. Do you see any common ground?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, the issues are always the same, right? I think what's really important and standing out for me right now is if we can take ourselves like a high level, like not say immigration, not say economy, not say all the hot talking points, and just ask ourselves, how are we treating our neighbors? Like, how are we treating one another? And is it okay that yesterday, on Saturday, 42 million of our neighbors no longer can feed themselves? Is it okay that our neighbors are getting taken off the streets by ICE? Is it okay that gender-affirming care is being taken from young people who really need it to survive? Is it okay that the Supreme Court has now justified racial profiling? That's not how I want to treat my neighbor. So I want to take away the hot button labels and just kind of ask ourselves, how are we treating our neighbors, and how will our policies and those who we vote affect that? Can we vote for people who will treat our neighbors the way that we want to be treated? That's my question. And for me right now, that's the Democratic Party.
Okay, let's pause right now and look carefully at what that panelist said. On its face, it sounds inspiring. Kindness, neighborliness, and fairness, sure. But here's the problem. If you're going to claim you treat your neighbors well, then your own side's conduct has to match. Let's talk about Jay Jones. Jones is a Democratic candidate in Virginia who, in a 2022 private text exchange, fantasized about shooting a Republican leader, writing, "Gilbert gets 2 bullets to the head," and wishing death upon his children. So the statement, "we treat our neighbors well," falls flat when a prominent figure in that claimed moral party explicitly engages in violent, hostile rhetoric about political opponents and their children. If you're genuinely treating your neighbors well, the language you use matters. You don't demonize them, threaten them, or wish violence. When you see that disconnect between the moral claim and the behavior, you don't just have high-minded talk, you have hypocrisy. And in politics, hypocrisy erodes credibility. So yes, neighborliness is a noble idea, but don't let it serve as a rhetorical shield when the behaviors behind it are inconsistent. Also, here is a critical point. Being neighborly doesn't mean having open borders and unchecked illegal immigration into the United States. The bottom line here is that this is a failed attempt to virtue signal and claim the moral high ground. Also, the claim that somehow 42 million people are missing their meals because of Republicans is flawed, since it is the Democrats that have refused to vote for a clean CR. The emergency fund will cover SNAP for the next 2 to 3 weeks. Then, what happens after that? If you really care about feeding the hungry in the U.S., shouldn't you be appealing to U.S. Senate Democrats to reopen the government? That was a lot of falsehood. Anyway, let's proceed.
And feeding people, that still comes into question because we all work very hard, and coming from an immigrant family, my family had to do everything the correct way. However, I do think that it dials down to the process in which we're bringing people in. The border becomes a very hot topic with that, right? One end sees it as we want to keep people out. The other side wants to see it as we want to vet people and guide them to the right process. However, that process also sometimes does take such a long time in this country to become a citizen or to get your paperwork, that's what circumvents our borders and forces people kind of to go the wrong way.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. I want to get back to my question because you kind of brought me back to it.
Yeah.
You mentioned neighbors. If there are illegals living among us, how many of you think that an illegal alien who came across our border and broke our first law, our sovereignty as a country, how do you see them as a neighbor? Are they?
Well, I'm illegal here, right?
Hold on, we're
this
just
land
doing
isn't mine.
Hold on, a show of hands. How many of you see that individual as a pure neighbor?
I know.
That's the majority. That's 5-3. So how do we cross this divide? How do we get there, Dove?
Honestly, I think it's hard. The rise of the partisan politics has really jeopardized what I view as one of the great features of American democracy, which is being able to work across the aisle. And I'm really looking for candidates who are able to do that, moderates, centrists, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, who are really able to work together in order to address issues like that. And in terms of your question on immigrants, I think a person is a person, regardless of what their legal status is, and their legal status can change. And I don't know or really care what their legal status is personally. I think if they're a person, they're my neighbor, and I'm going to treat them that way.
I think that there's a difference between being kind, and for me, my faith is one thing is being nice to people from different lands, but they also have to be respectful of our laws. And everybody wants to come to the United States because we have a great economy, have a lot of opportunity, but there's a process to do that. My family has been here since at least the 1700s. There's no one that's gave us a free $1,400 debit card. No one gave us a free apartment. No one gave us anything free. We had to work for it. So there is a process. And if we respect all people, that means that the people that come here need to respect our laws. And that's all that we're saying. We allowed 20 million immigrants in here legally since 2000. How much is too much, and how much are we going to put the burden on the taxpayers? Because the money has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
It's just common sense.
So Maria, I see you nodding. Jason.
Of course. Well, when it comes to illegal immigration, and we were talking about the shutdown previously, we have to point out that when we're talking about the bargaining chip, I don't think we can blame the president for that. I actually think we have to blame the Democrats for that. And this shutdown has not been popular, okay? This has been the Schumer shutdown, and they're playing politics with people's lives.
Yes.
And it's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing, and none of us would defend that.
Need I say more? The gentleman put it elegantly. Being neighborly doesn't mean disregarding the rule of law. Also, the Democrats alone are responsible for the shutdown, and you cannot shut down the government and start playing victim when the ramifications of that action manifest. Thank you for sticking with us until the end. If you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like and subscribe to support political common sense. Until next time, be safe.